For most of these, they they removed all the surrounding tissue. But this one's pretty interesting. This one's got this big flap of tissue hanging off of it. Just guess what that is. This is really the heart of the pericardium, the pericardial sac around the heart. And it would have been overlying the heart like this. So you're not seeing the heart, you're seeing some connective tissue around the heart making up that pericardial sac. It would be covering up the surface of the heart like this, and somebody would have had to remove all of it, peel it back away from the surface of the heart. It's all attached, right? The stuff you're seeing right here, this shiny surface, where you had a visceral and parietal pericardium, you can't get the visceral pericardium off of here. Remember, it's just simple squamous epithelium. I got an epithelial layer that's one cell thick, but you could, if you wanted to, take something sharp, some scissors or some tweezers or something, and grab some of this tissue and pull it away from the heart a little bit. But the visceral pericardium is firmly attached to here, to the heart surface. You really can't get it off without tearing it up. What you're looking at right here on this surface, smooth surface right here, this part of it is actually the parietal pericardium. And it's the same type of tissue. It's just one simple squamous epithelium with a bunch of connective tissue associated with it. So this visceral pericardium, parietal pericardium, both real nice smooth surfaces. And the space in between these two layers would be that pericardial cavity. Remember we said it wasn't a real space in a way, we called it a potential space. So there's nothing in there but a little bit of fluid. So these two layers being real smooth on either side, when that heart beats, it moves a little bit in here, and these two layers just slide against each other, right? It gives the heart a kind of a friction-free environment. So all the other ones have this stuff cut off. Remember that model that's on the stand, you know, the square base? Mm-hmm. That one I said it has those white lines going around it all over the place. Mm-hmm. And I said, what do those white lines represent? That's where this stuff would have been removed. So all the white lines on one of your models would have been this region right here where this pericardial sac, or where the parietal pericardium is attached to the heart. So to remove this, you would have to cut right here. And that model has a white line going all the way around it to show you where this attachment point would have been. So all this stuff is obviously just fat on here. Go back to this one. You know right and left. And it's the first thing you got to do. So I know this chamber is the left ventricle. I know that one's the right ventricle. And in both of the ventricles, we got these ridges of muscle. These ridges of muscle in either ventricle, maybe more evident on this side over here. All these muscular ridges would be the trabeculae carneae. And there are some portions of the trabeculae carneae, like this portion right here that's kind of bulging up a little bit, that's attached to these little white stringy things. These little white stringy things are, of course, the chordae tendineae. Right? This connective tissue attached at one end to this muscle right here, this muscular projection, which is really just part of the trabeculae carneae. Any of these little projections where chordae tendineae are attached will be a papillary muscle. And at the other end of this chordae tendineae, the other end of these, of course, going to be attached to a valve cusp. So I know this is part of this valve on this side, and you're not going to be able to count the flaps. You can't count the cusps. They're going to be cut, right? You know, the left AV valve, also known as the bicuspid or the mitral, and the right AV valve is the tricuspid. So you can't count the cusps necessarily and say, well, this one has 2 and this one has 3. But I know which one this one is because I know what side of the heart this is. This is the left side of the heart, the left ventricle, so this has got to be which one of those AV valves? The one that's on the left, right? And you have the option of either name. You say left AV valve, but you can spell it out, right, on the left, left atrioventricular valve, or you say that's the bicuspid or the mitral valve. And the one on the other side, of course, if I showed you this one over here, maybe a little bit harder to see here, but those are, of course, the 40 tendons. So I'd probably say in the lab, practical, these little white stringy things are attached to this piece of tissue right here. What's this piece of tissue? Or I'd say these little white stringy things are attached down here to this tissue. What's this tissue? Papillary muscle, chordae tendineae, and one of the AV valves. And on the left side, it's got to be the bicuspid or the mitral valve. Anything above this valve right here, like this space right here, what's that going to be? Well, we're over on the left side of the heart. Anything above this valve has got to be in the atrium, right? So this is the left atrium over here on this side. The right atrium right here, where my thumb is. And up in the atria, we have this another peculiar arrangement of muscle tissue here, some muscular ridges. These are, of course, kind of resemble the trabecular carni in a way, but we have another name for them. These would be called the pectinate muscles. Pectinate muscles up in the atrium on either side. And of course, we've got 4 heart valves. If I go back over to this side, this one is, of course, the left ventricle over here. And if this tube has been cut right along here, this would be a large blood vessel coming from this chamber right here. So if blood were in this chamber, when this ventricle contracts, you're going to push the blood this way past this structure, past this little structure, into this tube right here where my index finger is. So this is a valve. This is a valve that has 3 leaflets, 3 cusps. This is one of the semilunar valves. Do they have chordae tendineae attached to them? No. So you see a valve with just the flap. So this is and you would not be able to tell the difference either between the aortic semilunar valve and the pulmonary semilunar valve just by looking at the valve cusp. So how are you going to know which one it is? You know which side of the heart you're on. So the left side is pumping blood up through the aorta. Well, that's got to be the aortic semilunar valve. And for most of the hearts here, you cut them kind of right in the middle. You're not really going to see that pulmonary semilunar valve very well. But this tube right here has been sliced a little bit too. And you see if we look down in here, we can see anything. Yeah. You see some structure right here. These flaps, that's a semilunar valve as well. This one is the pulmonary semilunar valve. Kind of neat looking at it from this viewpoint. Blood would come in up or out of the screen and coming this way. We just push these valve flaps apart. Well, what if it tries to go the other way? What's going to happen? It's going to get caught here. It's going to get caught here, and we're going to push those valve cusps together. Like the blood's not going to flow back. Same thing over here. If the blood passing this valve, I push these flaps open, and after the ventricle relaxed, the blood would tend to flow backward a little bit, and it would get caught. It would get caught in these valve cusps and kind of close that valve. Push this way, kind of close those valve cusps and block the blood from moving back into the ventricle. For some of these hearts, in fact, I guess for all of them, and I wouldn't ask you this necessarily in the lab after this honest question or something. If I look right here, you're right behind this valve cusp, right behind this one. See a little opening right there? And there's an opening right here. Those are blood vessels coming off of the aorta. I wonder what they'd be. Well, remember we had that slide that said the first major branches coming off the aorta were the brachiocephalic, the left common carotid, and the left subclavian. These aren't big enough to be those, are they? What were the first real branches to come off the aorta? The little small ones way down at the base of the aorta going to the heart muscle itself, the coronary artery. So this one happens to be the opening right here for the right coronary artery, and this other opening right
Opening
there
of the
would
coronary
be
artery.
the opening for the left main coronary artery, which is going to divide into that left anterior descending and the left circumflex. It's kind of interesting the opening right behind that cusp. Yeah, it's probably true that when the heart beats, probably that opening is kind of covered up a little bit by this valve cusp. But then what's going to happen when the blood flows back? It's going to get caught in this pocket. Why isn't that kind of going to force it right down that little tube? It's going to help force that blood down that into that coronary artery. You can also tell the difference, and I pointed this out to a couple of you. This is the coronary trunk, and here's the aorta. You can actually tell the difference on most of these hearts. It may not be real obvious to you, but this wall right here is thicker than the other one. Maybe not by a whole bunch. But this one, I'm kind of pushing on it and feeling the texture of it. This one is much, much firmer than this one. This one is sort of floppy feeling, and this one is harder, it's more rigid, it's tougher. It just feels like tougher, springier tissue. In fact, if you squeeze it like this one feels kind of mushy, and I squeeze this one right here, and it's spongy, it just bounces right back. This aorta has a whole bunch of, has more muscular wall, plus it's got a whole bunch of elastic tissue in it as well, so really elastic artery. And it needs to have a thicker wall than the pulmonary trunk. For what reason? Where's the pressure going to be higher? In the aorta or in the pulmonary trunk? And why? Yeah, because the left ventricle generates more force, right? It's going to generate more pressure. And to withstand that pressure, the aorta is going to be a little bit tougher than the pulmonary trunk. One other feature I didn't point out, but pretty easy. These little floppy things. Auricle, got one there, and auricle over here. So if I did this on the lab path, well, I'm here on this side of the heart, and I said, what's this floppy tissue right here? This floppy appendage of this chamber. That would be the, and you need to say which side, right? That would be the left foot. Kind of weird little things. You get a different appreciation for them looking at the real thing, like in the model. It's hard to tell on the model what those things really are. That one, or sometimes, in a way, I can sort of imagine why somebody thought that looked like an ear, can't you? It does sort of look ear. So let's see if we can do that on a run through the same stuff.